When it comes to your finances, can you really automate everything?
Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Ogti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
Hi, my name is Aaron Ogti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area. I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast.
Hey, Aaron, great to be here today. And thanks everybody for listening and watching.
Great to be here as well. So a few weeks ago, I was checking my checking account and just double checking things, making sure everything's fine. And I noticed there was a pull of $3,000 out of my checking account to my investment company. And because I'm a financial advisor and I have my personal checking account and my business checking account at the same place, I was really curious, okay, I don't think my personal checking should be sending money to the investment company for anything works. It'll collect the SEI, the investment company will collect fees for me from client accounts. It'll pay out my business checking pays for personal. But why was this transfer happening? And I spent 5 minutes oh yeah, 6 months ago, I set up a quarterly transfer because revenues were doing pretty good. Expenses were kind of like household expenses were manageable. It's oh, I think I have this excess. I set up an automatic transfer that I actually forgot about. And when I mentioned that to Trishul, he's like, oh, there's other things like this. This is the beauty of automating as many of these things as possible. And we immediately started going down a list of different ways you can automate and set up things up. And it was just a perfect example of you set up a systematic savings and then you forget about it. And we want to talk about just lots of little things like that help make your life better. And it's one of I think we had an old episode, how to take advantage of your lazy brain. It's here's how you make your life better. Here's how you get all the compound growth and how the benefits down the road. And we have a bunch of tiny little examples, but this is one of those things of if you set something up and you forget about it completely and you're better off a year or two later, that's a good thing. And so one, Trisha, I want to ask you, does knowing me, did that surprise you at all? Did well, I was curious your reaction, but two, should we just start going down the list of what we automate?
Yeah, that is a nice Easter egg. No, it doesn't surprise me, Aaron. After 152 hours of conversation. And, I think we probably also mentioned this before. Maybe the best investment decision you can do is save consistently into an investment account and throw away the actual password to that account and come back in a couple of decades.
And it was one of those things I honestly don't remember setting it up. It was I knew based I was doing an end of year review, something like that, and oh, things look pretty good. I think I can set up this savings, and so I turned it on and I forgot about it. So
yeah,
I have extra money in my taxable investment account.
Aaron, we're getting old.
That is true. That is another thing. I do think about that.
Yeah. At this point, I realize you just can't rely on short-term memory for long-term.
That is a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe there was a time where stuff like that would stay fresh for longer, but I don't know. I'm in my 40s. Aaron, you're almost 40, right?
I'm 41. I've turned 42 in a few months.
Okay, so I should have probably remembered that.
Yes, we're both in our 40s.
Yeah, so it's just yeah, I just take notes all the time now, just because I know I'm gonna forget a minute later. And
okay, so that's a really good point.
To the calendar. So yeah.
So before we start getting into the sort of things, and that note taking idea is a really good good example, but can you think of an example of something you set up for yourself that you forgot about it and you were pleasantly surprised later? It's like, oh, thank you, past me.
Obviously the biggest thing is those investments, right? Just not keeping too close of an eye on them and letting them do whatever they want to do and checking back every 5 or 10 years. That can be
So
probably the
you
best
actually remember
present.
like a feeling of like, oh, I have more money than I thought.
Yeah, it happens because you know what's going to happen, but you don't need to think about it so much, right?
Yeah.
Especially like I've definitely mentioned this. When you're in the working mode and you're knee deep into your career, you just don't have time to think about that, right? You
Yeah.
know you're going to the 401k and it's happening somewhere, and you may not even have the login handy. Like I remember I didn't have everything as streamlined as I do now and all consolidated in a dashboard
Mm.
and all of that. And I remembered if I wanted to actually check that, I'd probably have to do like a forgot password and then I'd have to go through some sort of security thing. And no, I'll check next month and then just never get around to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I I do think there's setting it up the first time.
Yeah.
I because I like that I like that note taking idea, and I have some notes here, some notes here. Like I want to ask you about more about that, but if you don't set it up the first time, you're like, oh, I'll do this before my paycheck in a week.
Yeah.
Like you're going to forget already.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about this like, okay, so certainly with me, like when I've had the opportunity to invest in a 401k, I've always done, okay, what's the maximum I can put
Hmm.
in, make my investment choices, fill out that paperwork, hand it into HR. Okay,
Hmm.
that's day one of my job complete, at a
Yeah,
new
yeah, yeah.
company. And literally, I might not even think about it till I leave the firm, like until we're done, because you don't really need to do much beyond that, as long as you're maxing out each year and you have your allocation set.
I
So
think making sure it's invested is that like subcategory of most important thing. Like,
yeah, yeah. So traditionally, when you sign up for the plan, you can set your initial allocations, and then you can check a box to say, rebalance back to these and put any new contributions based upon these weights. Right, that's the typical
yeah,
setup of most plans. So if you are comfortable with those investment choices, meaning they're long-term oriented, they're set it and forget in nature, they're passively oriented, then yeah, they may not be too much to do beyond that for your 401k.
I want to say about 30 years ago, the default investment was left in like company stock.
Yeah.
About 20 years ago, default investment was probably cash.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe about 10 years ago, we started seeing a transition, uh, whereas like the default investment is a target date fund. So just
yeah,
based on your age, when do you turn 65? Here's a target date fund. And that's actually probably the best single default across everything. And I'd say it's pretty consistent across most companies now. That like you start a new company, they'll enroll you in the 401k at like 3%, and it's going into a target date fund. That's pretty common the default. So as long as I need to increase my 401k contributions, getting it to 15 plus percent, or kind of depending on what your salary is, try and make sure you max out. Uh, a target date fund is a really good default.
mhm,
Depending on your age, we'd probably recommend, well, even a 2060 fund, 2065 probably has 5 or 10% in bonds. And if you're in your 40s, let's go all stock. So we can actually get a little more aggressive. But you know what? If you have a target date fund at 2060 and you max it out, you're going to be really good and you forget it for a decade. You're going to be in really good shape.
yeah. Right, right. So I just want to add a few bullet points. I wanted to check the dates. I checked with the GPT. So basically, in the 2006 Pension Protection Act, that's what gave employers the legal umbrella regulation support to automatically enroll employees into 401ks,
Mhm.
automatically have them in and then require them to opt out if they didn't want
Yeah.
to be within it. And it's just one small change like that can make such a huge difference because having a little bit of a hurdle of saying you got to check a
Fill out
box,
the form. Yeah.
literally to be enrolled in the plan is too much for
Yeah.
many people. It makes a strong statistical difference just by having that box already checked, and
And
then
we
you
talked about
having to.
this, the choice architecture of opt-in versus opt-out. And
Yeah,
there's the
yeah,
classic stories of organ donors, whereas you say, uh, do you want to be an organ donor? And you just have to
yeah,
check a box. You get like 6% participation. But if you say you will be an organ donor unless you check this box, you get 94% participation.
yeah, yeah. And so, the next incarnation of that was in 2019 with the Secure Act and Secure Act 2.0 in 2022. So what that allowed is mandating auto enrollment for
Mm,
most new 401k plans starting this year. Frankly, I just had a client go through that,
okay.
and initial contributions are automatically set between like 3 to 10%,
Okay.
and it has an auto escalation automatically set
Oh,
of like 1% per year, um, up to at least 10% or max of
okay.
15. So it's doing all of these things that just people in the vast majority of cases should be doing at least this amount, but
Yeah.
just making it a bit harder for them to overlook it or just not get around to it, right?
Yeah. It's like if you forget to set this up for your first 2-3 years at your job, there's
Yeah,
already something there.
yeah. Look, I completely understand. You just started a new job. The last thing you want to shift your focus away from is doing the actual job, really
Yeah.
well, and just getting that button down. And it's just something that can fall through the cracks. So, it helps.
It's, and again, that 401k contribution is probably the, I'd say, single biggest example and probably the single most important example of the just set and forget it. If you max out your 401k, have it invested in equities, have invested in stocks, and you forget it for a couple decades, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the I'm trying to think of other really big, but uh, other examples that can make a huge help.
Yeah. Well, before we leave the 401k, the one thing we've mentioned in the past, and these are numbers I've thrown out there from time to time, if you max out the 401k, like 23, 24 grand a year,
Mhm.
or whatever the max happens to be on a forward looking basis over 30 years, that's a couple $1,000,000 right there,
Oh, I
at
think
retirement.
it's, yeah. I think I've
About 2
done it.
million.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've done it for uh, uh, couples where if they both max out their 401k, they're looking at 4 to 5 million. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So if that's your target goal for financial independence, that's what you need to do. Fill
yeah,
out that paperwork on day one. Work for 30 years. Come back. Right. Uh, make sure you. My recommendation. Sorry, I can't say recommendation. My
yeah. Here's what
educational
I
insight.
did, and what you recommend to your clients.
Yeah, what I recommend to my clients is let's come up with a diversified passive strategy that's risk aligned with your profile. But after that, we're kind of okay. We just need to do periodic checks on, are you still aligned with this risk profile, and are you still maxing out and okay with maxing out? But really, you're talking about something that can get you to being a multimillionaire with about
Oh yeah,
what, 1 hour of effort a year, maybe, something.
yeah. I the for four okay, so for 401k specifically, I do still make sure to check with my clients every year. And usually it's one of our first meetings of the year. One, are you maxing out? So like
Hmm.
the Congress does a pretty good job and the IRS of raising the maximum per year. Two, sometimes you have 401k plan changes that allow you to contribute more than that with the mega backdoor Roth 401k. So you can start saying up to about 70,000 this year. Depending on your individual situation, maybe you don't have the income to save that much, or if you do have the income, but you and your wife are both able to save in husband and wife are both able to save into a mega backdoor Roth. It's like, okay, maybe we don't need to save 140 per year for retirement. Like, that's part of my job of like, okay, we can actually spend some of that, but some of them are doing it already. So um, it's that finding that like beyond just the minimum of max out 23,500 in 2025 and invest in stocks. It's like, okay, as your income goes up, is your income now greater where that now represents 9% of your income? It's like, okay, in this case, the 401k alone may not be enough. We have to add some savings somewhere else. Or are you saving so well that, you know what, you're going to reach all your financial goals? We can actually spend a little bit more now if you wanted to. So that's a more nuanced conversation that I do have with all of my clients every year. But if we forget to have that conversation, or I get hit by a bus and they kind of don't have anyone to work with, like, they're going to be just fine because of that minimum.
Yeah. So, we can probably segregate these into like orders of magnitude in terms of impact. So
Yeah.
just doing the initial automation, and if you have some understanding that just maxing out that employee contribution is perfectly doable from now on a go forward basis, you could probably have that all buttoned up within that 1 hour per year time frame.
I think that's good. That's a really good point. It's there's like a maximum impact for minimal effort.
Right. Yeah. Now, if you go through what you just said, okay, make it a couple hours per year,
Yeah.
right?
But it's like we're like marginal benefit
Right.
for twice the effort.
Yeah.
Our impact per effort ratio is marginally decreasing.
Yeah. But even so, come on, a couple hours per year, like
Yeah.
literally not many things in your life will have even this amount of impact over,
And
the,
even then, it's probably not even a second hour per year. It's still,
yeah.
it's probably because I'm doing with them. It- like, it's 30 minutes of one meeting where I can check
Right.
both the 401ks.
Yeah.
50,
So
50 minutes for one, 50 minutes for the other, and we're done for the year.
right. Yeah. Now, there may be some initial planning work that takes the majority of the time, but, we're talking
That's true.
about automating your financial life, meaning let's
Yeah.
assume you have some sort of plan. Well, then what do you do? Yes, you can automate most of it from that point onward and then do periodic, incremental kick the
hmm
tire checks, right?
Okay, so I think that's a good point. Like, we want today's conversation to be, what are examples of those maximum impact to minimal effort automation?
Right. So,
So, like, go
that's your
ahead.
investment strategy, right? You automate your 401k, you become a multimillionaire
Yeah, yeah.
for husband wife.
The kind of the next easiest example I have was 529 plans for
Right.
college kids. Where same idea.
Right.
When they're born, you had a kid. You're thinking like, oh, let's do all these new things for the kid. Got to get the crib, got to get clothes, diapers. Set up the 529 plan. Set up an automatic contribution.
Yeah.
And yes, again, all stocks probably better growth, but if you had a target date fund, that's going to be just fine.
Mhm.
And you forget to look at it for a decade, and you're in pretty good shape. So it's
Yeah.
just another example of different vehicle, different purpose, but kind of just as maybe 2 hours of work that first year, but not much beyond that.
Yeah. So again, just some planning work to figure out how much you're going to target, work backwards on some math, on some annual contributions to meet that end target goal, yeah, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's very minimal. Just small pro tip. You don't have to wait till the kid's born. You can do it before they're born, and or even while uh, during pregnancy, even or a few years before.
You would use yourself as the beneficiary on the 529 plan.
Hmm.
And then when you have a social security number for the baby, you would change the beneficiary of the 529 plan.
Right. Yeah. So, when the kid comes, again, it's just one of those things. You got to focus on day one, the kid. So it's something
Yeah,
that could
yeah.
linger for a little bit. And
Okay. I'm trying to decide like how much caveats do we go down, because I want to say um, next marginal like maximal impact for minimal effort for the second kid. You don't even have to open up a second 529 plan. You just double your contributions.
sure.
Yeah, so that's the easy thing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Later on down the road, you can split the 529 plans and have the second one change the beneficiary. With the recent law change where now some of $529 can be rolled over to a Roth, there's a lot of caveats. It's up to 35,000, and it also counts as the child's Roth IRA contribution. And so like there's other things there. It's not an easy clear cut. Yes, you can have extra money automatically rolling over, but I think you have to have the plan in place for 10 years, I think. I'll have to double check
Yeah.
that
I think
number,
it's
but
something like that. Yeah.
it can be okay, if you have a second kid, you should probably take a look at it in the next 8 to 10 years. So
Okay.
not never. So that's what I say. The easy thing is just double the contribution, and that takes
Yeah.
care of maximal impact, minimal effort. But don't wait a decade to check it after the second kid is 10.
Right. Yeah.
Check it just a little sooner. But yeah, that works. Like that's what I ended up doing for my 3 kids is
Mhm.
open 529 for the first. I doubled the contribution when I had second, did another what was 50% increase, but the same amount for each kid the third. And now because of the law change, like okay, now I have to actually start looking at splitting these 529 plans.
Mhm.
So okay, what's your next thing in terms of maximal impact to minimal effort?
Yeah. So, we'll stick on investments for a little bit longer. Probably just on doing the Roth contributions back to a Roth, whatever it happens to
Okay.
be, or IRA contributions, depending on the situation.
So because that goes up each year, and I don't think custodians or like tell me about like how you set that up, because there's not with 401ks, there are mechanisms in place that prevent you from contributing too much.
Yeah.
So is this you're doing it once per year? Are you doing it monthly? Like what are the actual mechanics of how you automate that?
Okay. Well, so if you're an advisor, the advisor may reach out to you. So I just reach out to my clients. I have a boilerplate email like, hey, it's time to make your contributions. Do you want to make them? And they say yes. They just have to say, I
Okay.
agree. And then they're done. So it's a 1-minute task for my clients, every year. And I lay out the amount and all that. Now, there are a handful of strategies depending on a client situation. I'd say the majority of my clients, we end up doing back to Roths because it might be above income limits and things like that. So back to Roths are sensible. And typically, if you have excess, you're going to be making the contribution, over a given tax year. Slightly better to do it just in the January of the year where you're allowed to make that contribution rather than waiting until April 15th of the following year, the deadline, because you just get like 15 more months of tax-free growth. Just makes a
Okay.
marginal impact being able to do that. So the more common situation is, again, I send that email to clients. I say, here's the new max for the year. And I say I agree when you have the money in the account, you confirmed everything and so on. I lay out the things to think about. And then that's it. We just do it. January, February, we try to get them out of the way, and that's it. Now, if somebody's doing it on their own, they could do that, right? That's what I used to do before I had the business. Just we have the money, we know we're going to do it. Just do it in January 1st or first month of the year.
Okay, so you're now at that 1 hour of work per year
Yeah.
level again. So this is a manual process that you have every year.
Yeah. Yeah, so 1 hour, another hour, so per year will
Okay.
net you about $500,000 over
Okay.
your career, right? Roughly, that's the math. If you assume, again, similar to the 401k, you do this for like 30 years, you get like a 7% growth, inflation adjusted. That's about $500,000 if you do that. If your spouse does that, it's $1 million total. So if you're keeping tabs, you got the 4 million, 2 million each for the 401ks, another 500K each for the Roths, so that's 5 million total, roughly.
Okay. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, taxable investment accounts have no contribution limits.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've maxed out my 401k and I set up a systematic transfer to a taxable investment account, I could forget it for years and I'm just fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to weigh the manual work for the Roth each year versus like the tax-free benefit.
Yeah.
And in practice, I have seen the taxable investment account provides flexibility for things other than financial independence. Now, so a lot of times it could be a down payment on a house. That's probably the most common example. But maybe the manual work is on the investment decision side where it's not a 30, 40-year time frame. I have a shorter time frame, so I probably need to do a little more work figuring out what my asset allocation should be. Whereas the Roth IRA, like, oh, all stocks, no problem. Same thing as my 401k.
Or
So
target date fund as well. That's fine too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So because again, for me, I have enough other uses. I feel like my financial independence money is doing just fine. Could be college education money, could be like rental property, trying to buy something. Like there's could be just regular lifestyle before 60. I also like it's above contribution limit. So I think that's the reason like why I chose to. It was so easy for me to set up that systematic transfer to a taxable investment account, and I'll figure it out later,
Mm-hmm.
than do the work on the Roth IRA.
It certainly depends on the situation, right? The way I kind of work through it in my mind is first we come up with a target annual savings amount that we want, right? And it
Okay.
obviously doesn't have to be a static amount, but let's say we're targeting to put away 40,000 this year. Well, okay, that's simple. We'll just do
Yeah.
it with your 401k employee contributions. Done, right? And let's say it's more than that. Well, then we might consider a mega backdoor Roth strategy where you
Okay.
can put more into the employer plan. And let's say A, the employer doesn't have that, or B, we want to max out the mega backdoor Roths for both the spouses, or maybe there's just one spouse, but for whatever reason, we definitely know we want to put away more. Well, okay, then the next bucket would be the Roths. And then if we realize, oh, there's still going to be more, then we might do automated investments into a taxable account.
Okay. I guess I do want to push back a little bit there. I have seen in practice enough situations where a taxable investment account serves them better than a retirement account.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to say like yes, this applies to everyone. Like it definitely doesn't. But those that are able to save at that level, we're talking like, okay, we're saving between 1 and 200,000 a year.
Yep.
They often have other goals for the money and the savings that they don't know right now, but it often plays out that they will want to have access to that money a little easier than a retirement account.
Yeah.
And combined with how easy it is to automate it, and we'll set an 80-20 portfolio or a 60-40 portfolio, something like that.
Mhm.
Um, there's enough life changes that also depending on their age. That's probably another factor. I have been comfortable setting up automatic transfers to taxable investment accounts, even if they could have put more money in a retirement account somewhere.
Mhm. I think it's going to be case dependent here. There's too many caveats, but like for example, if you're in a situation where you want to put away 200, like you're comfortably in the 200 range per year, well, you already maxing out both. What's another 15K in a shelter, right, for your Roth? Even, and then you're still going to put in 30, 40 grand in a taxable account. So uh, that extra 15 grand going in the taxable account versus the Roth may not make a big difference in the flexibility you get. So for again, this may be a differential between like your client base and my client base. So a lot of my clients are focused on reaching this notion of financial independence sooner rather than later, right? What can we do to accelerate that path? And a large part of that is taking aggressive savings, right? Aggressive
Yeah, yeah,
advantage of tax shelters. So just riding that line a lot more closely than somebody who's being more loose on that financial independence goal, right?
that's a good point. And I don't, and as you say, also my clients with equity compensation, they tend to already have a significant chunk in company stock, whether it's from RSUs or
Yeah.
options, and they tend to have singular events where they're selling company stock and they have a liquidity event of $400,000 or $500,000 where they can't put that much in a retirement account.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, we have a taxable investment account already that's funded from uh, liquidated company stock.
Yeah. Yeah. So it, again, there's likely work on the planning side, but assuming you have the plan to
Yeah,
actually implement it, for my clients, it should be less than an hour a year. Frankly, it should be minutes in terms of what they need to do. If they're working
yeah.
with me, if they're not working with me, then again, I'd say an hour is comfortable.
Okay,
If you are going to do the Roth.
okay, okay. What's next on your trying to automate everything?
Well, we got that taxable bucket, so the taxable investment account would come next. Just automating
Okay,
monthly contributions into a taxable account, which again goes. What I would recommend to my clients is it would go into a passive strategy that's
yeah,
diversified and risk aligned. And yeah, I won't mention too many more caveats, but yeah, I'd say that'd be the next one.
okay.
Yeah.
Probably the next one I have is just systematic transfers from checking to savings, removing it from your operating account
Hmm.
into something that just you have to manually pull the money out to use it,
Hmm.
and you're creating that choice architecture again, that like opt-in opt-out idea of that you're creating friction to access that money. I've seen this helps people psychologically of, okay, I can try to save more. I
Hmm.
might be stretching. It might be too much. I might need this money. And like, okay, if you need it, it's right there. Just transfer it back. There's no problem.
Hmm.
And it allows kind of my conversation with clients of we're going to try to save 4,000 a month because based on your income and your expenses that you told me, we should have this gap.
Yeah.
I know their income is pretty clearly from their salary and take home pay,
Yeah.
but their expenses I never trust. Like there's always a bigger miscellaneous there that they can't capture. So they say, "Oh, I should be able to save 4,000 a month." Like, well, let's test that.
Right. There you
And
go.
we're going to transfer 4,000 a month to savings,
Yeah.
and we'll do that for 3 to 6 months. And we'll see how cash flow feels.
Yeah.
And if
Right.
it works, then yes, we'll set up that 4,000 a month to investments.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, you need to pull money out. It's like, okay, we have probably only 2 or 3,000 a month that we can transfer to taxable investments. But it was that setting up that systematic transfer in the first place
Mm-hmm.
both gave us information and was a middle ground between, oh, I'm not sure I can save that much, and putting in investments that have volatility.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd say that's why the for me, after 401k, Roth IRA, 529, taxable investment account, just a systematic transfer to savings
Yeah.
consistently helps. You
Mm-hmm.
set it up, and it's an example of it. You have extra cash that you didn't realize,
Mm-hmm.
and you can either get confident to save more into investments, or uh, you realize, okay, I'm confident I can save this much on a regular basis. Or even if you can't, you're still stretching your ability to save.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you had to pull back a few $1,000s, but we still confidently saved 3,000 a month over the last 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
over the last 6 months. So that transfer from checking to savings, I do find provides value, even if it's not going into investments.
Yeah. Well, so follow-up question, like, let do you treat it differently if the client already has a well-funded emergency fund already set up versus if they don't?
That's usually a conversation with the client.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question, because this is usually a way to build that if they don't have one.
Right.
Usually they have a company stock sale, so it's like, how much are we going to set aside as a cash reserve,
Mm-hmm.
and we're trying to separate kind of take home pay from their salary that pays for lifestyle and their ability to save from that,
Mm-hmm.
versus say RSU income, which they're selling consistently, and so they get these big lump sums. But that's almost easier for them to say everything, all of the proceeds from selling the RSUs, and I set money aside for taxes, because there's usually a withholding issue with RSUs. Set money aside for taxes, have my cash reserve. I know I can invest the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, yes, that transfer from checking to savings builds a cash reserve to a level they'd like. Sometimes it's preparing for taxes,
Mm-hmm.
but usually it's a test of separating out how much money they are getting from their take-home pay from their salary
Yeah.
versus other lump sum additions to the checking account.
Mm-hmm.
Because we try to, like, okay, 50K comes in from RSUs, and then we're going to set aside 10K for taxes,
Right.
and 40K goes to investments.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, a lot of the stock option and RSU planning, that starts to get hard to automate.
Right.
That's where a lot of the manual work comes into play. Because actually, the good or bad, a lot of times the default of, like, you've set and forget, is like you just start accumulating company stock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And for some people and some companies, that works out really well. And
Yeah.
for other people at other companies, that does not work out as well.
Yeah. I would say this is an example where the default maybe introduces more risk.
Yes. Oh, definitely. The default definitely introduces more risk.
Yeah. So it's something to be a little bit more aware of than the default of, like, the 401k we mentioned earlier, that
Yeah.
that rebalances to, like, a passive strategy over
Yeah.
decades. So
You know
yeah,
what? As you say that, that's another good point. I have found over the years that larger cash positions will help, like, psychological benefits of just stock volatility, but also helps with like the planning and some of the risks around holding company stock.
Mhm.
Where and there's some like math to support this, but like instead of having a diversified stock and bond portfolio, it's going to be more of a barbell strategy of super risky stock with safe cash kind of thing.
Mhm.
That's not we don't try to find that allocation is usually a cash reserve we want to get to, and there's always tax withholding issues and making estimated payments.
Yeah.
So having that large cash position, but I have, I'd say for my clients, no one really complains about having too much cash.
Mhm.
Because as long as we have a plan in place, like, okay, here's how much we're going to keep for this reason, and we're going to invest the rest into our diversified portfolio.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so it's just, again, one of those things where there's probably some planning to do, but once you have the planning, then
Yeah.
the automated savings can be kicked into gear. I think, since we're talking about checking account, savings account, I think it's a good time to like paint a bit of a picture of where this could potentially lead to. I like to tell my clients, our goal is to transition your financial life into like a well-oiled machine, right? Like
Hmm.
you can think of it like a business, right? Where money comes in, things happen, and money goes out, right? And important things get taken care of. And the checking account is kind of like the central hub of all of that activity, right?
Hmm.
So you get automatic deposits, right? Direct deposits for your paycheck. So that's all the revenue coming into this business. And the investments in the long-term viability of the business, right, are those accounts we mentioned. Now, the 401k automatically gets invested even before it hits your checking account. So one
Yeah.
thing off your plate, right?
I mean, that's still why it's probably my favorite thing. I love clients maxing out their 401k.
Right. So, um, I have a little bit of a soapbox rant about that, but I don't know if now's the time.
Uh, if
Not
you
the
keep it
time.
under, I'd like to hear it. I'd like to hear it. Go ahead. Like
Yes,
I'll say it's like, how can you not love a 401k? Like I think that's like, how can this is our number one, and you got an issue with it?
I like it for all the reasons we said, but I think it's just really annoying that it has to be through an employer. Meaning, you should be able to do the same thing on your own through one of the discount brokers. Meaning, because it's through your employer, you're relying on your employer to actually set up the plan, which it may not get around to if it's like a startup.
Mm,
You're relying on the employer to choose sensible options, which they may not do if they get pitched by the wrong firm. You're relying on your employer to come up with a strategy or a sense of selections that are cost effective, which they may not do if they want to pass on all these additional costs to you, which again don't have to exist if you could get the same investment choices in the public market without going through an employer for almost nothing. So,
okay.
okay, rant over, maybe.
Okay. So you don't like that it's tied to employer, similar like health insurance, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it adds way too much friction into the system, which ends up costing everybody.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, rant over.
So, but still, do your 401k.
Yes, because often you can't find a better solution on your own. You can't put that much away on your own because
And
let
I guess the other carrots, like the 401ks are at for-profit companies, so nonprofits will have 403bs, government agencies will have 457s. The military and other government agencies, federal government has the thrift savings plan, the TSP.
right.
So like there's most employers have something similar. But again, the small companies, like under 50 employees, they're the ones that are actually least likely to.
Yeah. Well, so maybe that's why this rant is more prominent in my thinking, because I've been at startups, and like my first job out of school, Aaron, I mentioned this, the company didn't have a 401k plan. They
Yeah,
finally got one, and the investment choices were horrible. And
yeah,
they had the pitch to us on the investment choices. I was the only one who raised my hand saying, "Where are the index funds? Where are the
yeah.
index funds?" And then they still, they still soft rolled it and wouldn't get it in there after like a year. Then even after I left, I started bugging them to get it in there because I wanted the
Yeah.
employer to have these options, and it was just frustrating because this is a financial service consulting firm, and if I didn't bring that up, I don't know if anybody would have, right? And then you have a couple dozen people having a very subpar plan, and it's just frustrating.
I, that's so okay. Now I'm going out totally off the rails. I do wonder how much. So this is the how much of your personal history impacts your bias kind of thing.
Yeah.
This is for every human being, because I at my prior firm, when I first started there, they didn't have a 401k.
Yeah.
So I maxed out my own Roth IRA and I started saving to a taxable investment account.
Yeah.
And so I had that comfort of saving into taxable investments already, and then they added a 401k, and so I changed kind of how much I'm saving into there. And my wife always had a 401k, but has always had a large publicly traded company, and oh, this is great. Her 401ks are so easy.
Yeah.
Her savings was so simple, and so I continued kind of down this path of we use my wife's 401k and the taxable investment account that I'd set up, and the Roth IRA kind of always came in third.
What doesn't that annoy you though? You let's say you put that 20,000 to a taxable account for that 1 year instead of the 401k. That's $4,000 that you'll never get back in tax savings. That'll compound over your lifetime. I would be pissed.
I want to say no. I didn't feel like I lost 4,000. That's probably the difference. And that was also money that we built up that allowed me. I was preparing to buy into a partnership in my prior firm, and negotiations there fell through, so it became the runway for me starting my own business.
Yeah.
So I did. There were times where I sold large chunks of it and had excess cash. That was getting runway to pay the bills while I built up my business.
Yeah.
I think that's probably that's another example of how a taxable investment account served my life better than if that money was in a Roth IRA.
Here's my take. I think that serendipitously worked out for you, but I don't think that's a reason to support a captive tax code. That's
So the employer thing I get. I'm fine with the employer thing.
Yeah. Well, that's my thing.
I get that rant. I guess I've seen enough examples where clients wanted to buy a property in Tahoe, and they other clients wanted to pay off their mortgage.
Yeah.
And there's just enough other examples. Again, it's yes, the Roth IRA is better than a taxable investment account.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's not 100-0. It's 70-30.
I think what I'm trying to get at is we should have the choice. It shouldn't be forced on us and then happen to work out well, because that's the chips that landed on our table. It should, everybody should have, I think, the same opportunity to invest regardless of which employer they work for.
I agree with that. And again, maybe it's I use the taxable investment account, I was comfortable with it because we also had my wife's 401k.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can have two, husband and wife, both at startups, and then now they just can't put anything away. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. We'll go back. I got other things on my list I want to get
to. Okay, wait, before I
checking account is a hub.
This whole conversation.
Checking account is a hub.
Okay, so here's the vision. Imagine the money's coming in, and the money that needs to get invested gets invested, and the money that needs to be spent gets spent, and you barely have to think about how all of this works, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the vision, hopefully, that you can try your best to lean towards, right, or to aim towards. And I think at this point you can get most of the way there. So as we already mentioned, money comes in, 401k, the money is already invested. The amount that you want to save for your other accounts, like your 529, your Roth, your taxable accounts, that automatically goes out, right? Or once a year goes out, depending on how you want to set that up. You got the money going, like you said, Aaron, to the emergency fund. Once that's filled up, or once you have your cash reserve set, well, then the way I like to do it with myself, and I've recommended it to clients, is I have a separate account for all my other expenses, another separate checking account, and I send over a fixed amount to that account every month.
Okay.
And that's the amount that I feel comfortable spending with a sensible buffer. So the notion is, for example, if I think my monthly living expenses are like 5 or 6,000 a month, then I'll send 5 or 6,000 to that account. And then all the other bills will come out of that. And then I know if that amount roughly stays, around 5 or 6,000 each month, then things are humming along smoothly. But if that cash balance is building up over 5-6 months, then I know potentially I could move some money out into additional savings or do an end of year sweep, right?
Okay.
And if things are getting lower each month, then we know we probably cut things too close, right? We're probably riding it too thin, and we should evaluate whether we need to bump it up.
Okay. It sounds similar to what I recommended, like transferring from checking to savings and being able to pull back. Other things, because I don't want to take too long, but I want to make sure we get a chance to list our things. Annual payments, so things like property taxes, life insurance, sometimes auto insurance. I have calculated a like monthly portion of that. I have a separate transfer from checking to savings of my annual payments. So I have one savings account that is kind of the funding for these annual payments. My life insurance, and so my life insurance, I have set up on an automatic bill pay, so it does pay it once per year annually because it's the same amount each year. I still have to manually pay my property taxes, in part because that number changes each year, and they charge you more if you use a credit card versus a online payment from checking account. I'm not sure if I have any other manual payments. And actually, for everyone, as part of a preparation for this conversation, Trishul got me to check my PG&E bill that I had been using the bill pay system that Wells Fargo offers, where PG&E sent the bill and I just clicked approve, and he had me go check, and I did find out I can actually automate that from the checking account, so I don't even have to click approve anymore.
Right.
So yes, we're now in a day of technology where a lot of this can be auto paid.
Yeah.
The risks of like subscriptions and auto pay that you're not looking at, that's a different conversation for a different day. Today we're trying to automate everything.
Right. Yeah. So essentially now we're talking about expenses, right? So we already automated the money coming in and the savings going out and the investment money going out. Expenses, yeah, you certainly should be able to automate all of it, or if not almost all of it. Some things are, again, more monthly and some things are more annual. But for the monthly ones, certainly, right? So this includes your electric, your utilities, your cable, your internet, your phone, whatever that happens to be, that can all automatically come out of your account. There shouldn't be stamps or mailing checks or whatever that old way happens to have been. So once the money's coming out on an automated basis, you can still put in checks and balances. Like I do have checks on my credit card to get alerts if there's a large spend, above a couple, whatever, or if balances get too high, and that way you're prepared, right? For, oh yeah, we bought flight tickets, for the three of us going internationally. Therefore, I need to move some over from the emergency fund, or however you want to handle that. So, a combination of the bills going out automatically and a few alerts here and there can go a long way. The last thing
I
I'll just
think I
mention.
think
Oh, yep.
I think I use the credit card the same way you talked about that separate checking account, where I use the credit card for the auto pay for as much as I can. It's the travel rewards card that my wife and I
Hmm.
use,
Yeah.
and I will review that every now and then. But like, yeah, I think I'm sort of curious. Like, do you also use a credit card as much as you can? And like, is that second checking account making one payment to the credit card each month?
That is pretty much it. And the stragglers, the 2 or 3 things that you can't do with credit, right?
Okay.
So literally everything but like 2 or 3 things. Yeah,
Okay.
essentially is what that account is. But it makes the accounting for that account very simple, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the only other thing I was going to say is, and then we also aren't afraid to have separate smaller accounts for other initiatives. So at this point, checking accounts should be free, right? You shouldn't be paying
Mhm.
any sort of maintenance on having a checking account.
I believe
And
in general, most banks say you have to have a direct deposit. As long as you're having some kind of direct deposit into the checking account, it'll be free.
yeah, there should be some way to engineer that, right? It
Yeah.
is the main take. And in addition to that, many banks allow you to spin up sub accounts or like alternate checking accounts for other purposes. So I have like 3 or 4. Like for example, I have a separate one for my daughter where money from grandparents or whatever
Mhm.
happens to go in. If it gets too large, then it goes to her investment account, right, as an overflow. But that way, it's not tied with us, and she has her own set of funds for stuff that we want to
I
get
think I have
for her. She wants.
savings accounts that are set up in each of my kids' names.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, frankly, my wife and I have a small account each for that type of thing, where this is just whatever money we want to spend for whatever reason. That's what it's there for. And then we have a family account, right, for
Okay.
what I just mentioned.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on your list? I had one last tiny item, but if you have anything else to share, like how to automate your
All right,
financial
so
life, I'd be
I
curious.
wrote a few things down. So I think we covered a bunch of things. So obviously, automate savings and investments first, meaning pay your future self first, right? Build wealth passively. We talked about that. Bill pay, budgeting, automation, right? Credit card and debt. Oh, taxes too. You can automate the taxes and quarterly payments if you have your safe harbor amount, right? You can have that
Mm.
also go out. If you know that amount in advance, you can have those funds automatically saved per month until that savings amount hits the amount you want, and then it gets sent out to the government. So that's certainly possible.
So this is one of the things where sometimes it works for my clients, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So the safe harbor is for federal taxes. You need to avoid an underpayment penalty. You need to save either 90% of this year's tax, or the safe harbor is 110% of last year's tax. So you can calculate how much you pay in 2024, 110% of that. If you make those withholdings and estimated payments, you're good for 2025.
Yeah.
For my clients' issues, especially when it's like IPOs or big stock sales, it can be so lumpy.
Mhm.
Where I have one client in particular, uh, the safe harbor amount based on their 110% of their last year tax for this year is going to be like 55% of their projected income this year.
Mhm.
Like it's so much higher because their 110% of last year's taxes are it doesn't make sense for them to contribute up to the safe harbor amount when a little extra work like estimating that 90% number, we're probably going to make payments of 200 or 300K less, like hundreds of thousands of dollars less in payments. And there, like, you start to get like the interest in a savings account is worth the time it takes to actually figure this out.
Yeah. So again, another example of there'll be a conversation for some planning, right?
Yeah.
And maybe an hour or two per year. But once you have the plan, you can automate the execution of the plan. So if it does happen to be a safe harbor, then you can make those quarterly payments,
Yeah.
as I'd mentioned. One caveat, that 110% is if your income is above 150K, right?
Okay.
Which it's 100% if it's below.
Oh,
So
okay. For California, for California residents, that safe harbor only exists up to $1 million.
okay, yeah,
If like total income, including stock sales, gets over $1 million,
yeah,
you have no safe harbor. You have to do 90% of this year's tax
for California state
for
taxes.
California
Yeah,
state tax. Yeah.
right, yeah. Yeah, so at the federal level, this, state level, Y, MMY,
Yeah.
MMV, sorry.
Okay. The last thing I had, just kind of one quick story. Um, when my wife was laid off, we were using Cobra for a while, and last year we switched to a covered California plan. So it's the Affordable Care Act plan. So we have a health insurance plan for the family, and there's something set up through my payroll to like reimburse the health insurance premiums. Uh, and the last 2 years, I think I was doing it as like a lump sum at the end of the year,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to uh, automate that monthly thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like I've unlikely to apply for anyone who doesn't have a small business kind of thing, but continually looking for those like manual things that you could automate
Yeah,
will make your life easier and probably make you more money, and like just like lots of other good things happen where here's a manual step, you've now done it 2 years in a row, can you make your life easier and automate that?
yeah.
It's kind of being on the lookout for things like that.
Hmm. Hmm. I guess two things to mention, because I know we're pressing towards the end. I think I like that, like rule of two or rule of. I think when I was in software engineering, it was like rule of three. If you end up doing something 3 times, automate it. Right?
Yeah.
Is one of the mantras that we kind of held on to loosely. But in addition, automation can also mean setting reminders, right? So I use a
Mm.
calendar all over the place. If I ever have something that I need to remember more than 5 minutes into the future,
Yeah.
it'll go on my calendar saying, "Remind me in 5 minutes
Yeah.
that I need to do this." And your future self will thank you. Like, so I have tons of things that are spread out over many months. Like, here, when it comes to finances, some examples are like I made have like a 0% credit card, right? Balance
Okay.
transfer, something like that. I have like 12 grand on it and it's expiring in 18 months. Well, I'll
Hmm.
put that on the calendar. In
Yeah.
17 months, roll that over or pay it off, right? So little things like that will help your future self get this again closer to that well-oiled machine example. And just one more point to make, I guess, on automation. A lot of what we've mentioned so far is sensible if you're in like the accumulation stage of your
Hmm.
life, right? And I would just say things might change slightly once you transition into like the decumulation stage. Let's say you're financially independent and now you're living off that nest egg. So the slight changes, you're not going to be pushing money from a paycheck into savings and
Yeah.
investments. Instead, roughly what I try to engineer with my clients is now you get a paycheck from your investments
Yeah.
forever, right? For the rest of your lives. And again, that's just a conversation, might take a better part of an hour or once a year, whatever it happens to be, to come up with that amount. But once we have that amount, essentially, if you're working with an advisor, you would, like me, I would say, all right, this is your paycheck. You'll get this amount for the next 12 months.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it again in a year and you will get a new amount, right? That's updated
Yeah.
depending on what we need to do. But if you're engineering this yourself, then essentially that's what you'll probably want to be thinking about. Come up with a safe amount that you can withdraw. Now, if you're doing it yourself, it may be a little bit of pain to sell off some investments and create that capital, figure out where that money's going to come
Mm.
from. So you may want to do it once a year or once every quarter or once every 6 months. But that's roughly the change that may happen once you make this transition from, working and accumulating assets to financial independence and pulling out assets from your nest egg.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's always more things to automate in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like the natural follow-up question for the next conversation is like, can you automate too much?
Is that a cliffhanger? Like, do we have some horror stories?
I don't know if I have it. I don't have anything there, but
I don't know if I
thank
do.
you for sharing your stories of automation.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I enjoyed the conversation, and I guess you'll have to find out on the next episode.
If we
If
come up
we,
with anything.
yeah, but we'll see. Thanks everybody for listening, and if you enjoyed this, do give us a like because every little like matters. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical as no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.